You ever notice how brave you feel when the lights are on? You'll walk anywhere, say anything, and even act tough. But once the lights turn off, suddenly every coat on a chair is a monster, every sound is a threat, and your brain starts remembering every scene from your favorite horror movie. Darkness doesn't attack you, it waits, and the longer you sit in it, the more your mind fills in the blanks. And that's the problem. Because if someone controls darkness, they don't have to beat you. They just have to remove what makes you certain. Hey Nexians, and welcome back to the Nexus. Last video, we talked about light, speed, perception, and control. Photokinesis is, but what can it do? And boy, am I here to tell you. At the basic level, photokinesis is visible and reactive. So naturally, today we're talking about what happens when all of that disappears. Because darkness isn't flashy. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't even need to. And yes, I know half of you still sleep with the nightlight. Dude, it's fine. This is a safe space. Most people think Umbrakinesis is just shadow clones, shadow paralysis, teleporting between dark corners, or being the edgy character in a long coat. And honestly, that's totally fair, because a lot of fiction blurs darkness with other abilities. If you're a One Piece fan, you might associate darkness with gravity because of the goat Blackbeard. If you're a Naruto fan, you might think of Shikamaru pinning someone in place with his shadows. And if you're a Black Clover fan, you might think of Yami cutting through dimensions with dark magic. But here's the thing, those abilities aren't pure darkness. Those things are darkness plus something else, whether it be gravity, spatial manipulation, physical binding, or dimensional slicing. Darkness gets mixed in as aesthetic, but Umbrakinesis by itself, at its most basic definition, is control over darkness. And darkness isn't an object. It's not a substance. It's the absence of light. Which means when you control darkness, you're not creating something. You're removing something. Visibility, clarity, and most importantly, removing certainty. And that truly matters. Because light manipulates what you see, and darkness decides that you see nothing at all. At its most basic, Umbrakinesis is environmental denial. You can deepen shadows, extinguish light sources, create areas of low visibility, blend into darkness, or obscure small objects or movements. This isn't flashy. You're not summoning void dragons, you're just making it harder to see, and that alone is disruptive. A beginner Umbrakinetic doesn't overpower opponents, they make them hesitate. If someone can't fully see your stance, your weapon, or your footing, their reaction time slows. And as we all know, hesitation in combat is everything. Even outside of combat, surveillance becomes unreliable, security cameras lose clarity, and snipers lose line of sight. Darkness at this level isn't lethal. It's inconvenient, and inconvenience wins more fights than brute force does. Also, yeah, this is the part where movie characters make bad decisions, like hiding in a house of chainsaws. Like, who does that? At an adept level, darkness isn't just environmental, it's responsive. You can extend shadows unnaturally, bind movement temporarily through shadow anchoring, create tendrils of darkness, dampen light in targeted areas, and manipulate contrast to distort depth perception. This is where people start associating it with paralysis or gravity. But it's not gravity, it's spatial denial. You're not increasing weight, you're increasing uncertainty. Shadows at this level can grab, wrap, and restrict. But they aren't brute force constructs, they're extensions of absence. You're weaponizing what isn't there, which is terrifying when you truly think about it. Because the opponent isn't fighting an object, they're fighting lack thereof, and that's way harder to predict. At an intermediate level, we enter higher skill expression. This is where constructs begin. You can form solidified shadow weapons, create shields from condensed darkness, generate temporary platforms, absorb incoming light-based attacks, and cloak allies in full spectrum concealment. This is no longer passive denial. This is active shaping of non-matter. And that's a really difficult feat, because darkness has no natural form. So to shape it, you must impose structure on absence. That's a level of conceptual control. At this stage, Umbrakinesis becomes versatile. Not overwhelming in raw damage, but unpredictable. Your sword isn't steel, it's condensed void. Your shield isn't reinforced metal, it's the removal of light's interactions. It's less about durability and more about distortion. And distortion is truly hard to counter. At a truly mastered level, darkness stops being localized. It becomes territorial. You can blanket entire battlefields in controlled night, remove visibility entirely, silence reflections, absorb or nullify incoming energy, and create persistent void zones. This is where Umbrakinesis feels oppressive. Not explosive, but truly oppressive. Air feels heavier, sound feels distant. Distance becomes unknowable. Even confident fighters begin to doubt themselves, because when you remove information, you remove confidence. And without confidence, even strong opponents crumble. At mastery, you're not attacking, you're subtracting, and subtraction is a terrifying form of control. Now that we know what Umbrakinesis is and what it can do, let's talk about what can be done to it. And starting this off, it will be the fact that darkness requires contrast. Darkness doesn't exist on its own. It exists because light exists, which means Umbrakinesis is inherently reactive. If an environment is fully illuminated from all directions, your control becomes much more difficult. From stadium lighting to high-intensity floodlights, daytime desert conditions, or even environments saturated with artificial light. These can deepen shadows, sure, but if there are no strong shadows to begin with, your starting point is a lot weaker. Unlike fire, which can be generated, earth, which is already present, darkness depends on subtraction, and subtraction requires something to subtract from. You can't take something from nothing after all. Conceptually, this is very important. Darkness can't overpower light in isolation. It can only replace it. That dependency limits its ceiling in fully illuminated environments. Next up is the limited direct damage output. Umbrakinesis is disruptive by nature, but disruption is not the same as destruction. At lower levels especially, darkness can't inherently burn, crush, pierce, or freeze. Unless you have mastered construct formation, your offense is indirect. You blind, confuse, and restrict. But if your opponent can fight blind or adapt quickly, you're suddenly less threatening. Darkness excels in advantage, but it struggles in raw force. If someone can operate without visual reliance, your denial loses effectiveness, which means elite opponents with sensory awareness, thermal vision, echolocation, or enhanced perception can bypass your strongest tool. Darkness removes sight. It doesn't remove capability, and that is very important. Third on the list is the high cognitive demand. Controlling absence isn't intuitive. Shaping darkness into structured constructs requires constant precision. Unlike Earth, which naturally holds shape, and water, which flows quite predictably, darkness has no physical structure. To give it form, you must maintain focus. Solid shadow blades, stable void platforms, and full battlefield cloaking. All of these require sustained mental effort. If concentration slips, constructs destabilize. That makes Umbrakinesis mentally taxing. And in prolonged combat, cognitive fatigue becomes a real threat. The more structured the darkness becomes, the more strain the user absorbs. which limits endurance at extremely high tiers. And lastly, it's the inability to truly create. Umbrakinesis cannot build. It can't grow food, it can't repair structures, it can't generate warmth, and it can't sustain ecosystems. It can conceal, suppress, and temporarily protect, but once the fight is over, it offers very little in reconstruction. Compare that to chlorokinesis, which rebuilds, hydrokinesis, which sustains life, and geokinesis, with constructs infrastructure. Umbrakinesis doesn't add to the world. It purely subtracts from it. And subtraction alone can't sustain civilization. That doesn't make it weak, it just makes it incomplete. And incompleteness matters when we're talking about winning. Now that we've talked about what it can do, what it can't do, and what it is, let's talk about some characters that define this ability. And starting us off is the man himself, Blackbeard. Marshall D. Teach, better known as Blackbeard, is one of the primary antagonists in One Piece, and the only character as of right now in the series to wield 2 devil fruits. Before he gained his second power, he was already terrifying because of the Yami Yami no Mi. In the world of One Piece, devil fruits usually grant some kind of ability, whether it be the elemental type from Logia, some kind of animal transformation from Zones, and literally everything else with Paramecia. But Blackbeard's darkness doesn't behave like fire or lightning. It absorbs, suppresses, and nullifies. Through techniques like the Black Vortex and Liberation, Blackbeard can pull enemies towards him and completely cancel out their devil fruit abilities on contact. His darkness isn't just shadow, it's gravitational force, crushing and all-consuming. It drags everything inwards, which makes Blackbeard iconic for Umbrakinesis. It isn't damage, it's denial. He doesn't overpower other abilities, he takes them away. In a world built on wacky powers, he represents something terrifyingly simple. What if I just turned your power off? That's darkness as suppression. Next up is Mr. Potential Man himself, Megumi Fushiguro. Megumi is one of the central deuteragonists in Jujutsu Kaisen, and serves as a direct ideological foil to Yuji Itadori, where Yuji is instinctive and self-sacrificing, and according to Gojo, will always hit for a home run. Megumi is calculating, strategic, and willing to make morally great decisions if it means winning. And, following that baseball analogy, Megumi usually hits for a bunt so his teammates can make the home run. His curse technique, the 10 Shadows, allows him to use shadows as a medium for summoning Shikigami, Divine Dogs, Nue, Max Elephant, and eventually Mahoraga. But what makes this Umbrakinesis adjacent isn't just the summoning, it's how he uses shadows as space. Megumi can store weapons inside his shadow, he can submerge himself into shadows to evade attacks, and even manipulate terrain using his domain expansion, Chimera Shadow Garden, turning the environment into a complete ocean of black. His darkness isn't just concealment, it's infrastructure. What makes Megumi iconic is that his shadows aren't passive, they're tactical platforms. His fights feel like chess matches, at least when he's not trying to kill himself. Darkness becomes positioning. Okay, this part is a slight caveat to Megumi's part, so for those of you who are anime only watchers, this is a spoiler warning. Alright, cool. So, Sukuna takes control of Megumi's body. The 10 Shadows technique stops being tactical from that point forward. It becomes tyrannical. Sukuna is the king of curses, the apex predator of the JJK world. Where Megumi uses his shadows strategically, Sukuna uses them to run Gojo down. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't calculate for survival. He calculates for domination. Under Sukuna's control, the 10 Shadows technique reaches terrifying efficiency. Shikigami, like Maharaga, are no longer last resort gambits. They're tools of his devastating arsenal. Shadows are no longer a medium, they're weapons. He combines domain expansions, curse energy refinement, and shadow manipulation into something far more oppressive than Megami ever displayed. And that's what makes Sukuna iconic for Umbrakinesis. He represents unrestrained mastery. Darkness stops being defensive and it becomes overwhelming in his hands. It's true authority. Megami uses it to survive and Sukuna uses it to rule, and that distinction is quite terrifying. Next up is Shikamaru from Naruto. Shikamaru is one of the most beloved tactical minds in Naruto, and arguably in anime as a whole. And he eventually rises to become the Hokage's chief strategist. And for those of you who watch Boruto or read Boruto, he's the Hokage. From the very beginning, he isn't introduced as the strongest fighter. He's introduced as the smartest and the laziest. His shadow possession jutsu allows him to extend his shadow and connect it to an opponent's. Once linked, the opponent mirrors his movements, effectively paralyzed unless they can overpower his technique. Later, he refines it into techniques like Shadow Strangle and Shadow Suing, increasing lethality and versatility. But here's what makes Shikamaru iconic. His darkness is simple. No explosive, massive beast, or reality warping. Just a shadow. And yet, he constantly defeats opponents stronger than him. Why? Because Umbrakinesis at its core is denial. He denies movement, positioning, and options. And Shikamaru proves something important about darkness. It doesn't need to be overwhelming, it just needs to be timed correctly. He represents the idea that absence is a tool, and in the hands of someone intelligent, that tool becomes devastating. That's why he's the GOAT. Next up is Yami from Black Clover. Yami Tsukihiro is the captain of the Black Bulls in Black Clover, and one of the most physically imposing mages in the entire series, maybe behind Mereoleona. In a world dominated by elemental magic, Yami's attribute stands out immediately: darkness magic. Unlike light or fire mages who radiate energy outwards, Yami's darkness is heavy, dense, almost gravitational in presence. Through techniques like Dark Cloaked Avidia Slash and Black Moon, he coats his blade in condensed darkness and releases arcs powerful enough to cut through dimensions. But here's the important nuance. Yami's powers aren't just dark swords. His magic slows, absorbs, and distorts. Dark magic in Black Clover is often described as having unusual interactions with other attributes. It can interfere with spatial manipulation, cut through barriers, and even behaves like gravitational mass compressed into a blade. That's Umbrakinesis pushed towards physical extremity. Darkness becomes weight, and density, and even something that space struggles to contain. What makes Yami iconic is that he doesn't treat darkness as subtle. He treats it as pressure. He stands at the front line, swinging through dimensions, and he proves that absence, when compressed, can become an overwhelming force. That's darkness at its most aggressive. And last, but certainly not least, Darkrai from Pokemon. Darkrai is a mythical Pokemon introduced in Generation 4, often portrayed not as evil, but is misunderstood. In the Pokemon world, Darkrai's presence induces nightmares, not because it chooses to be cruel, but because its very existence disrupts peace. Its signature move, Dark Void, plunges opponents into sleep, trapping them inside their own minds. Combined with nightmare-inducing effects, Darkrai doesn't attack directly, it isolates. It separates you from the battlefield, removing your awareness, and that's what makes it such a strong representation of Umbrakinesis. Darkrai's darkness isn't about physical domination, it's about internal absence. When you're trapped in a nightmare, you're alone. No allies, no certainty, and least of all, no control. Darkrai weaponizes the psychological space created by darkness. It turns absence into vulnerability. And that's why Darkrai is so iconic. Because sometimes the most terrifying form of darkness isn't the one that surrounds you, it's the one that isolates you inside your own mind. Alright, and now it's time for a lightning round. Starting us off, we have Xerath from Fairy Tail. Reaper from Overwatch. Noob Saibot from Mortal Kombat. And the legend herself, Raven, from the DC Comics universe. So throughout fiction, something interesting happens with darkness. Writers almost never leave it simple. Fire, it burns. Water, it flows. Earth, it builds. But darkness gets an upgrade. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Lore Build. In One Piece, it becomes gravity. In Naruto, paralysis. In Black Clover, it cuts space. In Fairy Tail, it becomes life erasure. And in Pokemon, it becomes nightmares, and really all things evil, to be fair. Darkness almost always gains an additional effect. And why is that? Because pure absence isn't visually stimulating enough for long-term storytelling. Darkness by itself removes, but removal is quite subtle, and fiction has a 10 for flair and spectacle. So authors add gravity amplification, spatial distortion, fear inducement, soul manipulation, curse-like mechanics, and energy absorption. Darkness becomes a carrier for more dramatic consequences. But here's the key. All those add-ons stem from the same root: absence. Gravity pulls inwards, spatial cuts remove barriers, curses remove life, and nightmares remove certainty. They're all narrative extensions of subtraction. Darkness isn't flashy on its own, so writers amplify its consequences. And that amplification tells us something important. Darkness is a narrative shortcut to escalation. If a character controls fire, they're dangerous and explosive. If a character controls darkness, they're existential and always there. And that's why it rarely stays simple. And let's be real here, giving the villain light powers just doesn't hit the same. Umbrakinesis isn't flashy. It doesn't explode, and it doesn't terraform continents. It doesn't build cities, but it doesn't need to do any of that. Darkness is complete all on its own. It denies, conceals, suppresses, and isolates. That alone is powerful. But when fiction layers darkness with gravity, space, curses, absorption, and fear amplification, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes existential. Darkness doesn't need upgrades to function. It benefits from them, like icing on a cake. The cake's already complete, but icing truly makes it forgettable. On its own, Umbrakinesis is disruptive, tactical and psychologically oppressive. With additions, it becomes a true villain maker, that final boss energy. And that's why darkness in fiction rarely stays simple, because absence, when enhanced, becomes dominant. And let's be honest, if someone can erase the battlefield and your confidence at the same time, I mean, really, good luck. If you want to see the thematic opposite of this power, if you want to see what happens when control replaces absence, go ahead and check out my Photokinesis breakdown, because while light reveals, darkness removes, and both change the battle in completely different ways. But all things considered, thank you for spending your time with me today. Seriously, time is the one thing I can't manipulate, at least not yet. So the fact that you chose to spend it here with me means a lot. If you enjoyed this breakdown, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe and join the Nexus. We're truly building something here, and not just power scaling, but understanding how fiction and all of pop culture and nerddom really work. And if you want deeper dives, early access, and direct support to the heart of the channel, memberships are open. But once again, those are truly optional. Every bit of support helps this channel grow into something bigger. And as always, stay aware, stay unseen, and this is your captain, signing out.